thick stacks of super light foam, barely there upper, a plate. Yep, this is a super shoe. In fact, it's Mizuno's first true super shoe. They brought out the Wave Rebellion Pro, and I gotta tell you, this shoe it's fun. It's a good one. It looks a little bit gimmicky, I'll give you that, right? You're looking at this thing saying, nah, this is not runnable. It is. First, wanna dive into the midsole. This crazy looking shaped thing is thick, it is soft, and it is bouncy. All the characteristics you need in a super shoe. But look at this heel. This is the first thing everybody's gonna look at, and they're gonna say, gimmick. It can't possibly be legal. You're gonna see this big thick stack of foam. It's tapered so much, it just is basically reducing material back there that you're never gonna touch. Like, nobody is gonna come in and land with such a check mark angle to their leg and foot and hit way back there. As we found in our testing, we come in and we land a little bit closer to that really thick, fat spot underneath the heel. I find myself actually feeling that bulge, and other wear testers told me the exact same thing. All that stuff back there behind it, you don't need it. And in fact, it's gone. There's no rubber even back there, so you're not gonna touch that. You don't need it. Now, let's talk about legality. World Athletics has instituted a rule for 40 millimeters of foam. That's the thickest the shoe can be at any point. Well, not even foam, rubber, everything has to be under 40 millimeters. And when we measure this in our lab, this is actually 52 millimeters thick. When we measure things in the lab, we cut the upper off so we can get to the shoe. And we measure the shoe at 2 different points for thickness. In the forefoot at about 75% of the length of the shoe, and in the heel at about 12.5%. So if you look at that, that's right about here is where we're gonna measure the heel. Now, when you land, you're never gonna land like this. Must be how they measured this shoe to get below 40 millimeters. But nobody lands like that. You're not gonna do that. It's so unnatural. You're gonna hit more toward the meat of this. So when we measure it flat in the lab. That's gonna take into account some of this extra material there. That's going to give you a taller ramp. Now the forefoot, when you're pushing off, you're gonna have that much underneath you. That's where you're gonna have your stack height. And if we look at those numbers, that's a 18 millimeter drop. That is massive. It is a ski slope. Typically, we're gonna see 4 to 8 to 12 millimeters is like the biggest. I think that is one of the reasons that this shoe kind of feels fun and bouncy, is it literally is propelling you forward just based on the geometry alone. But then you have this foam underneath the foot that, as I said, is super soft and bouncy. You have 2 layers of foam under here. The top layer is the softest layer, and the bottom layer is a little bit firmer and more resilient. So when you hit the ground, you're gonna feel the softness, you're gonna feel the comfort up against your foot, but it's gonna be resilient. It's gonna compress a little bit harder, and it's gonna store that energy for you to propel. Both are PIBA based, so it's the lightweight, really high energy return foam that we're seeing in super shoes. Really good stuff underneath there. Every good super shoe has to have a plate. Most of them are carbon fiber. This one is not carbon fiber. It's got a wave though, because Mizuno gonna keep the wave always. This one is a carbon-infused nylon-based plate. An interesting thing, you can see it here underneath. Mizuno really carved out the shoe to, I think, help save weight. Now, this is a really kind of a cool plate, and I was really interested in it, so I cut the bottom off the shoe. Now it looks like an old racing flat that we used to have. Without half of the foam, we can see the plate shape here underneath the foot. It's a really interesting shape. They actually brought the plate all the way to the edge of the shoe, and it is thicker, where you're getting some stability. So it's almost like a stability post in a traditional construction of a shoe, but it is not. It's really just stabilizing the foot as you go through. It's not a stability shoe. But then it comes into the inside and we see a hollow chamber here. This is just foam in the middle. They carved this out. It's not a particularly stiff plate in there. And in fact, we broke this back here. There's a little spine that runs through. That's the exposed part. It's a little thicker than the rest of the shoe. And when we were flexing it, we actually snapped that little spine there. But it's a flexible plate, but buried inside all that foam, it gives you the right amount of rigidity and stiffness, but it also just holds this foam together. When you land, this stuff is really squishy. You see me running, you're gonna see this really squish down and compress. And without that plate in there, it could be pretty tippy. And it is a pretty tippy shoe anyway. It is a pretty unstable platform when you're on top of all this foam. So without that plate really helping stabilize it and hold all this together, it would probably just be too squirrely to even run in. You wouldn't really be able to manage all that foam. So this is really gonna help stabilize the foot, give you that little bit of extra energy return as you're getting into your toes too, and really help you harness all that foam underneath your foot. It's an interesting shape to the plate. As I said, you've got the scoop kind of like this way, but it's also kind of scooped this way. So it's kind of creating a little bit of a bump just forward of your heel, right under the midfoot. So you're feeling that plate right up underneath you. But you also feel this cutaway if you're just standing there. It almost feels like you're falling forward, and the plate helps hold everything together. But if you kind of get back toward your heel, you almost fall backwards, just standing there walking. That sensation disappears entirely when you start running. I find myself getting a little bit more midfoot landing, which midfoot landing is kind of a misnomer. It's sort of flat foot because you have 2 points of contact in your foot. But I find myself hitting just a slight heel touch right here, and then loading up that plate and loading up that foam and getting into the forefoot. Without that plate, like I said, too squirrely. You wouldn't be able to do it. You know, aside from all the fancy bells and whistles that you see in a super shoe, is this outsole. Outsoles are kind of an afterthought in these super shoes because they have to strip away a lot of it to keep the shoe lightweight. Mizuno did it with what they're calling their G3 outsole, and it's really just a fabric-backed polyurethane resin. It's not rubber at all. It's durable, it's lightweight, and it's everywhere. And our testers just said it's so grippy. When you run in this thing, you feel it. Like, you hear it even. It's just clawing at the road. All these little nubs, just so many hard edges, really grabbing dry pavement and even wet surfaces. For such a beefy looking shoe, this thing is really lightweight. It's 7.5 ounces for a men's size 9. It's just 6 ounces for a women's 7. So it's on par with some of the fastest super shoes out there. And it looks like it's gonna be big, but Mizuno really did a lot of weight saving things. The channel here cuts a lot of the weight out that you might otherwise have, reduction in the rubber weight, but this upper also just saves a lot. There's nothing here. It is basically like a track spike, just enough to lock you in and hold you above that foam. You can see through it. Mostly there's a little bit of ventilation in here, and you can see your socks through there, and it just, there's no overlays, nothing that's going to weigh it down. There are a couple little internal taped things underneath to give you just enough structure. If we look at the cutaway here, you can see there's just enough to tie that eye row right into the midsole and keep you centered right over top of there. But there is nothing else. It is just breezy foam, really lightweight. You can see how flexible it is, just this piece alone. Just enough padding around the collar there that's gonna give you a little protection and hold you in and lock you in there too when you pull this tight. That's all you really need. And the tongue even has nothing. There's nothing to protect you from the laces there at all. No padding, nothing that's gonna weigh it down. I want to mention the tongue because it's kind of a cool feature there, is that because it is so thin, this could move around, but Mizuno actually just put extra slits in there and ran the laces through in 2 different spots. So when you tie that up, this tongue doesn't have anywhere to go. It can't go sideways because it's being held. It doesn't have just the single one, which still can tend to shift. So I like that a lot, especially with such a thin tongue, the thin upper. The shoe brings with it some style, right? A lot of people are not gonna like this print. They're gonna think it's a Dalmatian or it's ugly or whatever. I like it. It's loud, it's cool. It actually has a story though, and it's based on kakizomi, which is a form of calligraphy using characters in Japan. And it's basically like kind of a form of writing out a New Year's resolution, for example. And so Mizuno calls this kakizomi PB because there are hidden characters in here that sort of translate into PB, your personal best, right? So there is a story into this design. If this is too loud for you, Mizuno does make more muted standard colors that are not this loud, this colorful. I say you're gonna race and you're gonna lace it up and you wanna go fast, wear something fun, wear something that's gonna get people talking. But what was it like on the run? I enjoyed this shoe a lot. With our wear testers telling us the same thing, you hit here in the heel and you feel this foam just load up and squish a little bit. And with that exaggerated heel to toe drop, you feel like you're falling forward. You feel like you're getting pushed forward. It's almost impossible to have an extreme heel strike in this shoe. It just doesn't feel natural. Now, I don't think this shoe feels quite as light or as fast as, say, the Nike Vaporfly 3. When I went and raced my marathon a couple weeks later, I actually went with the Vaporfly 3 because I wanted the fastest possible shoe on race day and I felt comfortable with that. But I honestly don't think I'm gonna lose much with this shoe. I rolled through marathon pace for 13 miles effortlessly, and I was just picking up speed as I went along. It felt smooth. I never felt fatigued. I never felt weighed down. It did not feel bulky. You know, even at running 6:30 pace or faster, it felt really fluid and smooth. Do I think I'm gonna go this over the Vaporfly 3 on a race day? Maybe not, but it's definitely an option for me, especially with the fit. If you feel like you might be a little too tight in some of the other super shoes that do fit like a track spike, this one feels a little bit more generous. It's not roomy per se, but it's not super snug either. You can get into it pretty easily. You can cinch it up tight. You can get a good lockdown, but I think it feels, especially in the forefoot, you're gonna get a little bit of extra room that you might not in some of the other super shoes. Like any good super shoe, This one's gonna cost you 250 bucks. That's the going rate for the top racers these days. Now, I wanna hear from you. Have you been in this shoe? I wanna know what you think. Do you think it compares to some of the top racers? How does it compare in your eyes? I think it's a contender. Now, it came a little late. It's one of the moons. I was going into it and I screwed up on. Oh, you want the call for comments. I see you, I see you. All right. Yeah. That's perfect. One more time, now give me more.